we're recording and we should be good to go. So again, thank you for joining me here this evening for the Stats Lab session. As I mentioned in the email, this is not a required session this evening, but most students do usually find it pretty helpful. So it will hopefully help to give you advantage in moving forward with completing the homeworks. 4 and 5, I believe, are related to the Stats Lab. I will also be the person who grades those assignments, so I will grade them in Blackboard and leave you feedback, hopefully by Wednesday of next week after you turn them in. Sometimes I like to try to get the first assignment graded and back to you a little bit more quickly so you can have some time to see what the expectation is and to make any adjustments moving forward with the next assignment if you need to. And if you have any questions on the assignments as we go along the next couple of weeks, I'm going to ask that you please try to email me at my personal email address. And I'm going to type that here in the chat box just so everybody has it. Okay, I just typed that in the chat box. I have notorious issues with my Indiana Tech account. I don't know if it has to do with the firewall that is up at my place of business, and it just, I rarely can access my Indiana Tech email, unfortunately. We've tried lots of different things and just haven't been able to get it to work. So if you need to contact me, please do so at my personal email address. If you have tried to contact me previously and I haven't responded, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's just because I haven't been able to receive or respond to the message. So I apologize for that. And it looks like we might have just had some people come into the session. If you could keep your microphone muted, please, or if you're on a phone, if you could keep your phone microphone muted while you're not speaking, then it'll reduce that background noise or the clicking of keyboards and dogs barking and kids crying and things like that we might have going on in our houses. All right, so tonight what we're going to do is, you should have seen posted on Blackboard the Stats Labs exercises. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of those exercises that are similar to some of the exercises that you'll be doing in your homework to give you a little bit better of a sense of what we're looking for and what you need to be doing. I've been coordinating the Stats Labs for Indiana Tech, I believe, for 2 years, at least 2 years now. I've also taught the entire class, the RES7000. I've also taught RES. I've taught 2 other classes. I don't remember what the names are. So I've taught a range of classes for Indiana Tech and done the Stats Labs. My background is in public health. I have done quite a bit of applied research and also some academic research. I worked for my home state's legislature for about 7 years doing research and evaluation on legislative issues. I was fortunate enough to work with an independent research and evaluation think tank type entity. So we weren't tied to any particular party affiliation or member or committee. We just got to do research on issues. And I loved that. I loved being able to do that. So we did everything that we did there was really applied in nature. So it connects well with the emphasis of this global leadership program and the applied nature of research. I've since shifted over to becoming a full-time academician, so I'm back in the role of doing, well, I still like to do a lot of community-based research. I do academic research as well, and I'm a quantoid. I'm a quantitative analyst by nature. My dissertation research was a multivariate analysis on large public health data sets. So that's where my preferences and my orientation is on quantitative analysis of large data sets. So I use SPSS in my work very frequently, both in the applied life and in my academic life. And I have to really give it some props because I feel like it's a fantastic program. There is a learning curve associated with it, but in the last 10 to 15 years, the SPSS software manufacturers have done a really good job of making this thing as user-friendly as they possibly can. That way more people will want to buy a license and use it. 15, 20 many years ago, it was so user unfriendly. You really had to be a statistician and a computer programmer to be able to use the software. And so it was almost kind of cliquish, whether or not you knew how to use SPSS. And even back when I started learning it, it was kind of you were looked down upon if you used SPSS via the menu-driven approach, the point-and-click approach. And all the people who were doing the real research were doing it via the syntax-driven approach. So it was actually a good thing for me because I learned it both ways. I learned how to run SPSS by writing code, and I learned how to run SPSS by doing point-and-click. But they've made it much more accessible to the everyday population now, and I think that that's good. That means that more people have access to good tools to be able to do good research, to answer some important questions and influence policy or practice or whatever it is you're trying to do. So I think it's a good thing. That being said, it still needs to be learned how to be handled properly, because it's a garbage in, garbage out scenario. You can put a whole bunch of junk into SPSS and tell it to compute, and it will compute, and everything it gives you right back out is a whole bunch of junk, meaning that you can't interpret it, and you certainly can't report it. And if you do, you're either, breaching ethics or just making a huge, horrible mistake, not on purpose. So we have to ensure that we know what we're doing, at least at a minimum level, if we want to use this software, this wonderful software program. So does anybody have any general questions before we get started? All right, I'll continue moving on then. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So that should be coming up now. Will everybody just check in with me either via voice or via the chat box when you can see my screen?
I can see your screen. This is Terry.
Hi, Terry. Thank you.
This is Jennifer. I actually called right. I'm not on my computer.
Okay, that's fine, Jennifer. We're recording this session, and one of the benefits of that is you can kind of go back and take a look at the session when you get to a computer if you want to look at any of the examples. So that's absolutely fine. You'll be able to listen, and hopefully some of it will be helpful.
Thank you.
And it'll be a YouTube video. It does take me a little while.
This is Jay here. I'm able to see it.
Okay, great.
And this is Lynn. I'm able to see it as well.
Okay, great. All right. So what I think I'd like to do first is and go over to our Blackboard site here. And I want to show you a couple of resources. These are all my classes here that I've taught. Where are we? We are in spring. Okay. All right. So you may or may not have seen over here under the Supplemental Materials tab, I have provided some SPSS resources. So there's some other resources in here, but then there's a folder specifically for SPSS. So if you click on that folder, it's going to give you links to some helpful sites that I feel are particularly useful. The one that I feel like students find the most helpful and that I think is the most helpful is this YouTube channel with the SPSS tutorials. So if you click on that, it's going to bring you to this page here. And what this is it's a collection of this HNAP, this gentleman, his username there is HNAP. He has put together a bunch of different tutorials, and they're numbered and labeled according to what type of analysis it is that you would like to do. So for example, you're trying to run an ANOVA, or you're trying to run a t-test, or you're just trying to do descriptive statistics. You can click on these relatively short videos and watch a video clip. And I think that they're really helpful, so I wanted to direct your attention to those. Also, there's some other sites here, depending on what you're looking for, to click on and give you a little bit of information outside of what we're going to do in the stats lab and outside of what you're going to learn from your textbook. Hopefully everybody saw in the email that I sent way back at the beginning of the session that you really need to have, and you must have, there really isn't an option, you must have a new version of your textbook. And this started to become a problem after we started running the course more frequently, was that students were buying used editions of the textbook, which is great because it saves money. But it's not so great because with this particular textbook, if you look in it, you'll notice that most of the pages are workbook style, meaning you can tear them out. And a lot of students, when they submit their assignment, will tear their assignment out and scan it to turn it in. And then they'll file it or recycle it or throw it away or whatever they're going to do with it when they're done with the class. So students were buying the used textbook and they were, having to go to page 83 and then going to start the assignment and realizing that page 83 and page 85 and every single page that they need is not in the book they have. In addition to that, double check and make sure you have a disc, a CD in the back of your textbook. So if you bought a new edition, then it should be all sealed up and nobody's taken that disc out. If something has happened and you're stuck, let me know. Okay. I've had to pinch hit with a student last semester where I ended up, and you don't want to do it this way because it's just really inefficient and a pain for everybody, but I ended up taking camera shots of the pages she was missing out of her book just because I didn't want her at the last minute to not be able to complete the assignment and fail the class. So we made it work, but it's definitely not ideal because the words were grainy, and we know how good camera phone and uploading things is. So make sure you're in good shape with your book and you'll be set. All right. Let's get rid of that. And let's open SPSS. So depending on what type of computer hardware you have, it's going to look a little bit differently. I'm working on a Mac here, so keep in mind if yours looks a little bit different, then that's okay. If you're using Windows-based or whatever it is you're using, might look a little bit different. From what I know, almost all of the different commands or menu-driven point and click directions are the same between Windows and Mac, but that doesn't mean we won't eventually find something that's a little bit different. But sometimes they are. And another thing that I feel like is important to let students know is with SPSS, there are many different ways to approach the same question and to arrive at the correct answer. So what I mean by that is the assignment might ask you to run a frequency, and there might be 4 or 5 ways in SPSS you can run a frequency and get the same answer. Or, it might ask you to do a pie chart, and there might be several ways in SPSS to do a pie chart and to come out with the correct pie chart. So you may know of a way to do something that we don't talk about tonight that's different, and as long as it gets the same result, it's absolutely fine. Or the book may tell you to do something one way, and you know SPSS because you've used it and you do it differently, and that's absolutely fine. With this class, there really is a bell-shaped curve with regard to ability levels with SPSS. Sometimes students come in having never heard of it before. Sometimes students come in having a very advanced knowledge of it, and they're able to help teach me some things. Usually students kind of fall somewhere in the middle. They've done a little bit of it and they're comfortable with it, but they haven't done a lot. Again, some students come in and they're absolutely totally overwhelmed because they've never done anything like this. But it's really worth it to learn this program. If you're doing a quantitative dissertation, unless you're going to use some other type of analysis software like Stata or SAS, this really SPSS is kind of has the monopoly on the market of quantitative analysis right now. Because they do a really good job at making it available and user-friendly for students to be able to use it. So get to know how to use SPSS and get comfortable with it. It should be showing you the blank screen or the blank data view right now on your screen. And what I like to think about SPSS, the layout of it, is it's similar to an Excel file where you have your rows down your left side and your columns across the top. So each of these cells, it's like a matrix, will be a combination of your row and your variable. Okay, so think about it or conceptually similarly to a spreadsheet, to an Excel spreadsheet. But you'll notice down here, clearly it's quite a bit more sophisticated than Excel. And I know you can do a lot of data analyses. You can do, means, medians, modes, measures of central tendencies, things like that in Excel, but it kind of stops there. And next week, when we start talking about inference or the multivariate analysis, you'll see how much more SPSS does than, why can't I just do this analysis in Excel? Well, it isn't going to answer your research questions if your research questions are slightly more sophisticated than running measures of central tendency, which at a dissertation level, they should be. So that's where the similarities to Excel really end. But importantly, you want to look down here because you have two different types of views in this screen. You have your data view, which is going to show you all of your data points once we populate the cells. And you have a variable view. And this variable view over here is telling us everything about our variables that are in this data set. So our variables are the ones running across in our columns, and they're going to be explained more in this variable view because they contain a lot of information. Hopefully they'll contain a lot more information than just an abbreviation for the variable name. So you can toggle back and forth depending on what you're doing between those two views. If you have a really small data set, you can eyeball your entire data set in the data view. If you only have 10 cases and 6 variables, you can easily eyeball your data. But if you're working with large data sets, larger, couple hundred, or with the data that I've worked with, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 cases and many variables, you can't really do that. So that's why we have this variable view to click over and to see some of the characteristics of your variable. And when you get a data set, it's really important to know what's going on with your variables in there, because in order to move forward with doing data analysis, we have to be able to justify, and we have to ensure that our data source is well vetted. Meaning that we need to be confident that our data source is reliable and valid. So in order to do that, we have to check our data source and make sure that it was from a reputable entity or collected in a reputable way. For example, a lot of the data that I use is the publicly available data on the CDC's website. Again, I mentioned I do lots of public health research. So I use lots of public health indicator data from the CDC's website and my local state agency's website. And so I have to go in and I have to read about where these data are coming from. How are they collected? What type of cleaning is done to them? And I need to know the source and be confident in my source before I can even go and run the first frequency. That's the first thing that I need to do. So after I've done this, a lot of times you'll get a big data set, and it'll either be a publicly available data set, or maybe you get it from somewhere, you pay for it, or you have an arrangement with another researcher or collaborator to get a data set. You're going to have to go in and you're going to have to look at all these variables in the data set. And hopefully your data file comes with a data dictionary. And what a data dictionary does is it explains all of these different characteristics for every single one of the variables that you have in your data file. And that's really important. And hopefully, and in when you're a student and you get a nice CD data disk with your textbook, you're going to have all of these files filled out, but these columns filled out. But in the real world, when you get a data file from somewhere, it's not going to be that clean. So you're going to hope that you can get a data dictionary with it. A project that I'm working on right now, it has fantastic data and it's a great data set, and I'm really excited about having access to it. but it is a mess and it does not have a data dictionary. So if I'm going to be able to do this research and have a high level of rigor and a high level of confidence in what I'm doing with these data, first I have to go in and I have to basically recreate a data set for all of these different, a data dictionary for all of these different variables and data elements that are in my data file, because I don't know a lot about them. So I have to do due diligence in making sure that it's not garbage in, garbage out. And if I'm putting this crummy data in, I'm going to get results and then I'm going to go try to publish them. And the peer review process is going to not work out so well for me, or even worse, I get published and then I realize it's all wrong because my data was a mess. So the first thing that you want to do when you get a data set is you want to go to this variable view screen and take a look and make sure that you understand what all of these variables are. What do they mean? What are they measuring? How are they conceptualized? How do we know that they've been measured? They've measured what they intended to measure reliably and validly. All of those things, hopefully all of these things sound familiar that you guys have been discussing earlier on in the semester are all going to kind of come together. A lot of students get really intimidated and overwhelmed when it comes to the data analysis component of a project or their dissertation. But honestly, the most difficult work all leads up to that point. It's the conceptualization. It's refining and specifying your research question. It's operationalizing your variables, deciding what data sources you're going to use, deciding what measures you're going to use. Those things are all so important because if you don't do them well, by the time you get to the data analysis, something's going to go very wrong. So that work needs to be put in on the front end to make sure that you've thought all those things through. Another thing with SPSS organizationally here is that there are 3 different types of screens in SPSS. This is our data editor. Okay, so this is where you're editing and manipulating your data in your data editor. You also have a couple of other different files that are listed right here. You have a syntax file. Oh, it's going to make me open one. Well, I'll show you that now. We also have, in a minute, we also have that syntax file. Okay. And the syntax file is the code that's running behind all of this point and click stuff you can do with SPSS. Okay. So you may or may not use that syntax file. This other file that you're definitely going to have to use, that you must use, is the output file. And the output file is where all your results from the analysis are displayed. Okay, so your data file is where you're doing data manipulation. Your syntax file is all of the code running behind the point and click. And the output is where your results are going to be displayed. So when you're turning in your homework, you're going to be turning in information from the output page. Again, I'll put in a little plug. If you learn how to use this syntax and you plan on doing data analysis as part of your career or your dissertation, it'll be really helpful to you in the long run. And it's not real difficult to do. So while it's not required for this class, I would encourage you to try to pick that up if you're willing and able to do it. So we'll talk a little bit more about those 3 types of files as we go along. So how do we get data into this data editor? Well, we can type it in. If we're doing data entry and we have some measures to put in, just making up some numbers, then we type them in. Okay, and it'll give us a default abbreviation for variable. And we can come over here and rename our variable something that makes sense to us. I'm just putting in random numbers in. So we'll go in and change. Maybe we want to take a person's height and their weight. Okay, we can put this all in by hand, and then obviously we're going to put some numbers that make a little more sense. Hopefully, those could make sense, right? But okay, And then maybe we want to do height in inches. Oops. Okay. So we can do it by hand. And you're going to have some examples of doing that. And you click over here to variable view, and you're going to need to make sure that you tell SPSS all of these important things about your variable. But also, you're going to get them from your disk, your data disk in your book. So you're going to put your disk into your disk drive, and just like Word or Excel, you're going to go over to File and then Open. And you're going to want to open your data from somewhere. All right. So I'm going to go in actually and take this stuff out. Because I don't want it to. But it's not going to let me delete it. Okay. I'm just going to have to close it out. I'm new to Mac. I'm relatively new to Mac, so I'm learning. No, do not save the data set. All right. So let's go ahead and get started on some of the examples. All right, so when you open SPSS up, it's going to give you some options. You can run a tutorial. You can just start typing in your data like we were doing. You can run an existing query or create a new query, or you can come over here to open existing data source. And so if you've recently used any SPSS files, they'll be over here, and you can grab them from here. But if not, you can click out of this and just go up to your file open and grab them off of your CD-ROM. So whichever one works best for you. So let's go to chapter 2, question 2 to start. And that's on page 40 of your book if you're following along at home. And it's telling us right there that we need to open this states 10 data set. So you go find that from wherever you have it located, and you open it up, and you'll see that it's going to populate all of your data into this screen. So we're here in our data view, and you can see, you can eyeball. Looks like we have all these states. Our state is a unit of analysis over here, and it's a relatively small data set. We have 51 cases or 51 rows, and then these are all of our variables going across the top. And you'll see that each of these variables is an acronym, which is common in SPSS because you have limits or restrictions on the length of the variable name and the types of characters that are allowed in the variable name. So it's usually some type of abbreviation, which is why you want to have a data dictionary. But you can also click over here to variable view, and hopefully if your data set comes as nice and pristine as these do from your textbook, you'll also have a label. So it's going to tell you, this label will tell you what this acronym means. Okay. Now a data dictionary will also tell you what was the source of this birth rate. What was this, the sample? What was all these other important things that you're going to want to know, that you're going to need to justify should you choose to use these variables in some type of meaningful analysis. So just knowing what the label is doesn't necessarily give you enough information to have a high level of confidence that this is a good measure of the birth rate per 1,000. This is just telling you more about what it is. So for exercise 2 here, it's basically just asking you to open this variable view and to look at some variables that measure the following concepts. Okay. So the variable names begin with the 2-letter code for the general topic of the variable. So for economic prosperity, you would scroll down and you would list the variable that matches with that. And you can get that either by the code or by the label here. So you'd fill in the variable name, which might be EDS154% of a population with a bachelor's degree or more, 2008. The same thing for substance abuse and the same thing for educational attainment. So it's just a way to get you acclimated to what's going on with the variables. Also to note what type of variable they are. So state is a string variable, whereas the others are numeric. And then in numeric, it'll give you other options to specify if you'd like, including the width, the number of decimal places, etc. Value labels are also important, and we'll get to talking about those in a little bit. There's none in this data set, but this means that there may be an arbitrary value assigned to the response choices in this variable, and the values will tell you what that is. And also, we need to tell it what we want it to do with missing data. Again, there aren't any missing data in some of these data sets because it's a nice, clean example data set. However, in the real world, that's not very likely to happen. You're going to have to decide what you're going to do with your missing data. And then over here, very importantly, this level of measure is something that you need to understand and have. Hope I'm changing it around. We won't. No, I didn't change it around. Or maybe I did. I don't remember what it was. We won't save it anyway. But it's important because when you're getting into some of these higher level, more sophisticated types of statistical analyses, you can only do certain types of analyses with certain levels of measure. If you think back to what the levels of measure are, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. If you remember, variables at the nominal level give us the least specificity and information. They're usually dichotomous, yes, no, level variables. So as you can imagine, you can't run an average or a statistical mean of a yes-no question. You can run a percentage, how many answered yes, how many answered no, but I can't have an average of yes, no. But sometimes if you go in and you tell SPSS to do that, it will do it and it will give you some crazy number. And if you report that, it's going to be really confusing for everybody involved. That's why we need to know what our level of our variables are before we try to run any type of analysis. So we need to have that measure set appropriately over here in this column. All right, let's move on to question 4, chapter 2. On page 42. Now this one is asking us to open a new data set, the GS-S08 data set. In these newer versions of SPSS, you can have multiple data sets open at the same time. So when I first started using SPSS, you could only be working in one data set at a time. So you'd have this one open and you'd need to do your analysis and then you'd have to close it out and you'd have to open the next one. Well, now you can have multiple data sets open. I caution you on doing that, particularly if you're just learning SPSS, because it can get very confusing and you can start running analysis in a data set and it's actually doing the analysis on the other data set because you don't have the appropriate one activated. So it's just easier while you're learning to close them out. Although you don't have to shut your whole program down. That's probably not the most efficient way to do it. But like I said, I'm still learning my Mac here. But I would suggest maybe opening the other data set up and then closing the other one out. That way it doesn't close your whole program down. So that way you don't have multiples running at the same time. So you got to go find this other data set and open it up. And here we go. Here's the different data set. And as you can see now, our year over here is the unit of analysis. And our variables are different across the top. And I'll show you what I meant about that. You can go File, Open, Data, and you can open another data set. Although it might take me too long to find it here. So I just won't use that example now. But just have one open at a time for now, just to keep things a little less confusing. As you may have noticed, we also had a couple different screens pop up. This here is the example of the output. When I came over here and I said these are the different types of files that you can open, this here is the example of the output. So what this output page is doing is every time we run analysis, it's giving us the commands behind that. So it's telling us that we told SPSS to get this file, and it's giving me a warning, and it's telling me that the file might not be readable, but it looks like everything's okay because it looked like my file opened okay. So you always, whenever you do a general command with SPSS and open something or save something, you always want to click over here to your output screen to make sure there's not an error. There's not a big error message in it, because if you get an error message, it means that something went wrong. So when we start running the analysis, your output file is going to be where that information is. So we're back over here in our data view. And what this is doing is it's telling us to examine the variable satisfaction with financial situation. And it's going to, again, ask you to identify values and value labels. A little bit different with this data set is that you'll see we have labels, and we also have something called value labels. All right. So if we find this variable of SATFIN,
I think it's number 30.
there we go, thank you. And there's different ways, depending on what hardware you're using, to either alphabetize or time order these or chronological order your variables. But if you have a small enough data set, you can kind of just eyeball through. There's also a go-to, I think it might be control, like I said, I don't know what it is on my Mac, but a control find, maybe control find, where you can, you can find a name in there so you don't have to take a while to scroll through. But if you're just wanting to look through and get familiar with what these are, you can do that as well. So it's showing here that it's numeric. It means satisfaction with financial situation. But if we click on this value label, we can see that there's value labels. So these researchers ask their respondents, how satisfied are you with your financial situation? And they responded either satisfied, more or less satisfied, not at all satisfied, don't know, NAIAP. Now, if you have a data dictionary, that should all be specified. Well, what the heck does IAP mean? What does DK mean? But your book has done that for us on page 42. It shows here that IAP means inapplicable, DK means don't know, and NA means no answer. So when you look back over at your variable view, you're not going to see these words necessarily. You might see these numbers, which is important because if you went and told SPSS to compute an average for this variable, it would, because there are numbers in there. So it would give you the average of all of these numbers, but it wouldn't mean anything interpretable, because it would be the average of these numbers, which are value labels, and they don't mean anything. So for this question, you would have to do percentages or some other type of analysis that was more appropriate, because you can't have an average of these value labels. All right, any questions so far? All right, let's move on to, I guess that was, where did I go? Number 4. All right, number 5, right underneath there on page 42. So a novice researcher begins an analysis of this data set and wants to look at the distribution of income in the United States. She looks at the data in the data view, and sees values that range mostly from 1 to 25, but occasionally she sees the number 98. So that might look, interesting, that's odd. So she explains that the data must be wrong because almost no one has an income of 10. But her instructor says that the data are fine and asks her to reassess what's going on. Well, how would we know what a 10 means in that income 06 variable? Well, we come over here and we find our income 06 variable. Let's see if I can eyeball it. Here we go. Okay. We click on these labels and we can clearly see that each of these has a value label associated with it. Okay, so somebody with an income of 10, of label 10, actually has a numeric income of 125,000 to 149.9. Or I'm sorry, 12,500 to 14.99. All right. So an easy way to do that is we can look at a frequency. And this is in alphabetical order here, so it makes it pretty easy to move this over. Now, what I would suggest you do if you're interested in learning syntax is you're not just going to click OK here every time. I would go in and click paste first. And what that does is it translates this point and click menu-driven process that you're doing into syntax. It's going to open us up a syntax file. So here's that third type of file we talked about at the beginning of class. This is your syntax editor. And this is basically what's running behind the scenes every time you point and click in SPSS. It's the computer language telling it what it needs to do. Okay? And what this does, and why I think it's very important, is it leaves you an audit trail. For every single one of the projects that I worked on when I did research for my state's legislature, we had to have it reviewed by a third-party reviewer or a QA reviewer in a different department than we were working in, because we were providing information that legislators and policymakers were making decisions based on. So we needed to make sure that it was accurate, that it didn't have errors or mistakes. So we would have to be able to show our QA reviewer how we got to our conclusion, how we got where we were. And we wouldn't be able to do this with data analysis if we didn't have some type of syntax file that they could go in and rerun. So your syntax file is basically just your audit trail of everything that you're doing that somebody else or yourself could go back in and rerun again if they needed to. So if you're working on your dissertation and your chair asked you to run a particular set of analyses again and you don't have a syntax file with all of that in there, you have to go back through and do all that pointing and clicking all over again, which potentially could be a lot depending on how big of an analysis you're doing. But if you have the syntax file, you can just go in and pick out the lines of code that you need to run and rerun it. So it's just one extra little click to click that paste button to paste this in here, and then you have your file. And then to get it to run, you go in and you highlight the section that you want run, and you click the run or the little play button. And then it's going to give you this output here in your output screen, which is where your results are. So it's telling us how many valid responses we had, how many were missing, what the different categories were, and the different percentages. And then say we accidentally go to X out of our output file and we forget to save it. We can just go back into the syntax and rerun it, and then we have it again without having to go back through the point and click. Now, it doesn't get too difficult when you're doing something really simple like a frequency, but after you've been working for hours or days or weeks or months on a data set and you have a lot of analysis going on, having that audit trail is really handy and important. All right. So let's take a look at Chapter 3, Number 1. On page 69. Okay, So in advance of performing an analysis, you're going to make a prediction, because that's what as researchers we do. Frequently we come up with hypotheses, or we're trying to make predictions. So we're going to make a prediction as to what % of Americans view their marriages as very happy, somewhat happy, and not too happy. So we're going to come up with a prediction, and then we're going to run some data analysis and see how closely our predictions compare to what the data has to say. So we're going to go in here, we're going to write down the predicted percents and then the actual percents. So the predicted percents isn't going to have a right or wrong answer. There might be some examples in your homework that ask you for your prediction or your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer there. You're just going to put down what you think. But then the actual percentage is where you're going to go in, you're going to run some analysis. You're going to go into analysis, frequencies, and again, there's different ways to get here. So if you know of a different way to get to these and it works for you, that's absolutely fine. You want to make sure you take that income 06 back out of there, and we're going to put happiness of marriage back in here. Okay. And then we're going to paste it. And then we're going to only select what we want to run, which is that new analysis. Okay. And here we go. It's giving us the rundown of each of these response categories, and then we can compare them to what we thought. All right. So what I want to go back and caution you about is in your data dictionary or in your review of this data source, there needs to be a definition of exactly what each of these things mean. What does very happy mean? What does it mean to be very happy in your marriage? What does it mean to be pretty happy? And how is that different from not too happy? You got to make sure you have a high level of confidence in how these researchers were measuring this construct or measuring this variable. Because maybe this isn't the best way. So maybe this information isn't very good information. And you want to know that before you continue your analysis. Any questions so far? All right, let's move to our final example for this evening, Chapter 3, Question 2 on page 70. And again, we're working here in this GSS 08 data set. It's asking us to construct and print a bar chart displaying how common marital infidelity is. So it's another one of our variables. And it's the ever stray variable. So let's just see if we can eyeball it here in our data editor. If you see it, oh, there it is. Okay, so it's number 43. So it's numeric. Here's our label. Okay. Whoa, I just made everything giant. Here are what our values are. Okay. No, yes, inapplicable, don't know, NA. So we need to know what each of those response choices means. Okay, so 0, 1, so we're not going to take an average of this because that's inappropriate. We would have to do a percent. We can see that it does have some missing values, so we're going to take that into consideration, why people may or may not be answering that question. If we have systematic missingness or random missingness. So it wants us to do a graph or a bar chart displaying that. So what I would do first is I would do, whoops, I would not shrink up the variable, the data editor. I would run an analysis on this. I would want to know the frequencies on this variable. Just so I can get a sense. Of the distribution. All right, so it looks like we have some no's, we have some yeses, we have a few of the other different categories. So the total valid number of responses was 1,260. There are 763 missing. So it looks like the inapplicable ones might be people who aren't married. So that makes sense as to why those data were missing. But DK, if that means don't know, that could be questionable. Is that just an error or a glitch, or did the people not really know if they ever had sex with someone other than their spouse while married, the number's so small, it's really relatively insignificant. You could exclude those individuals in your analysis if you wanted to. But what we could do then is we could go in and we can make a graph, okay? And there's a few different ways to do it. There's the chart builder, if you're using the new and improved version, or the legacy dialogues if you're familiar with the older versions. Typically, I use the legacy dialogues just because I know that it's what I know and it's what I'm used to doing. But the chart builder is actually quite a bit more interactive. And you come over here and you select your variable. Oh, I passed it. Here we go. Okay. And then you're going to tell it all of these different things that you want it to do. Okay. And another thing that you can do that I highly recommend you do is that you paste your charts into your syntax. Because say you accidentally don't save your file, or you do a really fancy chart in that chart builder with lots of different specifications on it, then you're going to have to go back and redo all of that when you have lost your file. You can see, you can set your titles and options and lots of different things, but then you can paste that right in to your syntax. We're going to come over to our syntax and run it. And it's going to give us a bar chart. Okay, this one was pretty simple. I didn't put a lot of bells and whistles on it. And then maybe you want to draw some conclusions from your data about what this means about monogamy and marriage. Keep in mind that everything's always sample dependent, and correlation does not equal causality. I think that's something that's really important to adopt as a mantra as a novice researcher and as you're moving forward in your research and PhD level careers, is that correlation does not equate causality. And as researchers, we're never going into a research project with the intention to prove or disprove or accept or reject a hypothesis. And that's really important. That's something very important to keep in mind. And the reason for that is that in order to establish causality, we have to meet three basic criteria. The first one is time order, meaning that something always happens before the outcome. So our independent variable is always happening before the change in our dependent variable. We have to establish correlation. So we have to know that those two variables are moving together, either in a positive or negative direction. And, we can establish correlation as well. Lots of studies are correlational studies or studies of association, traditional measures of association. So we can do the time order and we can do the correlation pretty well. But the third one is the real sticky one. We have to be able to rule out all possible alternatives. And, that's really hard to do because a lot of times we don't even know what all of the possible alternatives are. And a good example of this that I like to use to illustrate it is we know that smoking tobacco is very highly correlated with incidence prevalence of lung cancer. That's very well established in the literature. The more you smoke and the longer you smoke for, the more likely you are to get lung cancer. But we also know that not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer. So therefore, we cannot accurately say that smoking causes lung cancer because some people who smoke do not get lung cancer. So there are other variables out there that we either have yet to identify or that interact or that work together to cause lung cancer. Maybe it's a gene that you have, or maybe it's exposure to some other type of environmental toxin, or maybe it's, there's lots of different other hypotheses out there. But we can't say that smoking causes lung cancer because it doesn't do that in 100% of circumstances. So there's something else going on there. We can say with a very high level of certainty that it does increase your risk and that it is a highly correlated with it, but we can't say that it causes it. So that's the one example that I like to use. So we have to be very careful in using that causal language in our research, and it is sample dependent. All of our research is sample dependent. While many of our studies have good external generalizability, meaning that many of our studies are sampled so well that we can say from a relatively small sample of individuals, we can interpret these results and apply them to the greater population, but they're still sample dependent. The results are still sample dependent. If you went out and you took another sample, you could get similar results, you could get different results. Depends on the level of external generalizability in your study and how well your study's been sampled and some other components to your study. All right, so I think that's all of our examples for this evening. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. This is Terry.
Hi, Terry, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I have a question. For the disk that you have, you're going to open that up directly into SPSS. When I opened mine up, I found out that my data set was not appearing. And so I noticed that when you opened yours up, you went directly into SPSS to open it up. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope the one thing that kind of red flag that just went off in my mind is I hope that you have the correct license to open the data set. You should be able to go right to your CD and
Mm-hmm.
open your CD drive and double click on this data set and it will open in SPSS. Just like, if you went from your flash drive and tried to open a Word file and double clicked on it, it would open in Word immediately.
Right.
It
Right.
should do that. If not, I would suggest trying to open SPSS on your machine first and then getting the file open
Mm-hmm.
and opening it that way. And if that doesn't work, then you might need to get with me on what version of SPSS, or there might be something going on with your SPSS license.
Okay.
But it should work a couple different ways. I just happen to have, I don't even have my disk in my machine now. I just have these files saved on my hard drive from previous sessions. So that's why I opened it the way that I did.
Okay.
But you should, here, let's give it a shot if I can find it. No, don't save. Don't save. Let's see if I can find where those files are. Okay. So say this was my CD drive. I should just be able to double click on that right there and it opened the SPSS program. So yeah, it seems to be working for mine.
Okay.
It's taking a while, but it's doing it. Yeah. So there we go. You should be able to do it that way. And if you're still having issues, just let me know.
Okay. I do that, but it comes up empty.
Wow. Okay. And you're doing it right off your disk?
Mm-hmm. And it's a brand new disk.
Okay. Do you know what version of SPSS you're running or where you downloaded it from?
What version is this? I am not.
I'll tell you what.
IBM. It just says it doesn't give me. It says 22.
Okay.
SBS statistics 22.
Maybe close out. What to do is to try to close out of everything and then go to your desktop and open SPSS first.
Okay.
And then go to File, Open, Data, and then go to your disk drive, whatever you have, your device, and try to open it that way and see if it works.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions while we're Trying
Yes,
to.
Dr. O'Dare, this
Yes.
is Jay Hugh. My question is that with the handout that was given, it says to post, to scan the pages and post it to Blackboard. So I did that and I scanned them, but my question is I didn't see where to post them. So if I went into the Blackboard and I posted it under class questions and comments,
Okay.
if I'm not supposed to put it there, please let me know. It doesn't give me an option to delete it. All it says on the handout is post it on Blackboard, but because I didn't see where to post it, I posted it under class questions and comments.
Okay. There should
Under,
be.
yeah, under,
So I think we're in week 6. There should be a folder. There should be a Dropbox. Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Now that Dropbox, because the questions that are from the week 6 tab, those questions are different from the exercises on the handout. So I was planning on submitting those questions that I see there on your screen in that folder, but where I posted mine is in the discussion tab on the left-hand side.
Okay. I see what you're saying. So you're saying that you did the exercises for tonight's lab and posted those, and then you're saving this area here for when you're going to post your homework. Is that right?
Yes, yes, Doctor, yes.
That's good. You
hey,
weren't required
hello?
to post. You weren't required to post them, so that's fine.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, hello? Hello?
Hi there. I'm sorry about
Hello?
that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we're getting some feedback. So
Yeah,
if you can make sure your microphone's muted when you're not speaking, that would be helpful. But go ahead.
yeah, hi, this is Angel. Yeah, there's a link in for homework for in the Blackboard. So I don't know, Jehu, if you can see it, but when I go to the week 6 tab, there's a link to upload the assignment, the homework for where you can upload the scan
Yeah, I
copy.
appreciate that, Angel. Yeah, I see that homework, but if you look at the assignment, the assignments exercises are different than that of the handout. So I was saving those assignments to post in that folder, but it does say on the homework handout to post those on Blackboard. That's why I wasn't sure where to post the handout questions on where to post them on Blackboard.
That is correct. It does say that to post them on Blackboard.
So I went to discussions on the discussion folder on the left, and I went to class questions and comments thread, and I posted it there. But if it's not supposed to be there, I apologize.
That's absolutely fine, and I apologize for that confusion. That is a little bit confusing, so we'll have to fix that language next session so it's not so confusing. But thank you.
Okay, awesome.
All
So you're
right.
saying we don't have to post, so Dr. O'Dare, you're saying we don't have to post those questions at all then?
Well, not the exercises for the labs. You have to post the
Right.
homework, yes, but you don't need to worry about posting the exercises for the labs. That language is a little
Okay.
bit outdated and does need to be fixed.
Okay. Thank you.
This is just a quick question about just SPSS and the downloads in general when we
Okay.
had to purchase it. I wasn't able to get the Visualization Designer 1.0, and I called them, and they said that it was because I had a newer version on my computer. Is that something that we're going to need for this course or for the next 2 courses?
I'm not sure. I do not believe so, but let me follow up on there and let you know. It sounds like that might be an add-on There's several things.
I think so. The lady didn't even know what it did. I was like, okay. She was like, she said most people probably wouldn't need it, but.
Yeah, no, I really don't think that you're going to need that. They have like extra advanced, sophisticated add-ons for SPSS. Like if you're having to do special sampling with populations and things like that, there are extra things that you can pay for an add-on. But all you need is just the real basic one for this class.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And please do contact me at this Outlook email address is best if you have any questions. And I'll look forward to reading your assignments, getting you that feedback as soon as I can.
Okay, Dr. O'Dear, before you leave,
Yes.
you said that you're going to post this on, are you going to post, you said on YouTube, I know, but are you going to put it anywhere else?
Yes, it'll be,
where
I'll
we
post
can go
the
back,
link.
this recorded?
Yep, I'll email the link out via Blackboard to you guys and say, okay, the video is uploaded and here's the link. So you'll be able to click on the link.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone, we have a good evening and I'll be in touch soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.